This update for June 24, 2023, date 486 of the war, end of the date update. As you can see, I'm going to actually discuss a little bit of economic data that came at the end of the work part of the week. And then I'm going to talk about this Wagner Group, this events that happened today. First, let's discuss economic situation, and then we're going to switch to all of that. So there is PMI data came on Friday for UK, France, Germany, and US. It's all very negative. And PMI, just for those who don't know, it's a Purchasing Manager Index. So it's kind of like a forward-looking indicator of the activity. Where it's done by survey. So it's a private organization. It's not the government statistical office. It's a private organization that just surveys businesses and tries to kind of create index that shows if certain sector of the economy expansion or contraction, right? And the data was for industrial production, and then services. That's like two big parts, right? For manufacturing, or I think production, manufacturing, whatever it's called, it looked very ugly for all four. So this is again, and this is more forward-looking. As I said, this is not statistical office. It's not like historical data. So there's definitely less sort of reliability. There's more room for error. There's no question about it. At the same time, it's the best we can have, let's put it this way. And all of them, as I said, show there is no this manufacturing renaissance anywhere in the West. And it looks like what we've seen that German manufacturing is holding on, that it actually probably we will not see that once the government statistical data will come out from Germany. It probably will show actually some kind of mild contraction, because all of the and the problem was all of this data is in all four countries. It's in contraction, and the contraction is accelerating in the manufacturing. So again, this is to that story about U.S. manufacturing renaissance, and that all of that. It's not happening. It's the West is clearly sinking. And I showed before, the Asia is sinking, and Russia is sinking too. The planet is sinking in a way. I'm sure there are exceptions, but the major economic centers of the world, let's put it this way, from a manufacturing perspective. Then there is services component. And as I said before, services component is very sticky. It's usually... It's really need to get really bad for services to go into contraction territory. And the way these indices are built is above 50 is expansion, below 50 is contraction. So as I said, services are very sticky. They remain fairly resilient. At least they usually don't go much or at all into contraction. They usually just hover about sort of this close to 50, sort of neutral, no growth, but along those situations. So, but actually, in case of France, it actually went into contraction. So again, for all the rest three, it's also in a negative trajectory. So it's accelerating decline. They're not close to, they're not in 50 yet. But they're very close to 50 in the remaining three. But in France, as I said, it's an outright contraction. So far, France looks like it's leading in the sort of the economy contraction relative, let's say, to Germany, US, and UK. However, UK is also in a very terrible situation. The retail sales are contracting, which is very, very unusual situation. Simply because of inflation, right? If you have inflation, and because it measures actually just money, like prices, basically, it doesn't measure, it's not looking, it's price times quantity, right? Creates value. So it measures this value, doesn't measure really Q part, quantity component, right? And so usually because of inflation, because P is going up, even if your Q is going down, usually P is going more, so it sort of outweighs this decline in Q. So visually, optically, it looks like it's still growing. Typically, in most cases, the V is still growing, right? And that's why you can see this situation where the economy is in terrible shape, but nominally retail sales are still in a growth mode. It's just because of the inflation part of it. But in the UK, it's even inflation doesn't sort of help, or actually it's going into actually deflationary situation. Looks like in the UK, and as I said, retail sales decline. So again, and the data before from the UK was also pretty ugly. So I would say that I would single out like UK is the most like in the worst situation in Europe, and then followed by that France, and then Germany number 3. I haven't seen data from Italy and Spain, but they are sort of weaker links relative to these 3. So as you can see, again, I want to summarize the West, or the main sort of economic power engines of the West, also quickly sinking into decline. China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all of that are declining. Russia is, despite all of the stories, there is no formal data, and I think that, as I explained to you before about this GDP data, is misleading, but sort of more anecdotal indicators show that economies there is definitely not growing, probably declining. And there is also data that came out that's showing inflation picking up in Russia, which also means that government is issuing this unbacked credit, or in simple terms, printing money, but that's technically not correct name to it. It's just issuing more unbacked credit. That's the correct way to say, because what we call money is not really money, it's debt, it's credit. So as I said before, the true money is something that is equity, and that's really just precious metals. That's truly the true money from that perspective. So going back to all of this, looks like it looks pretty bad, and from all sort of in all areas. Now let's quickly look. There's data from the US in terms of actual bank financial system, where it stands, and so far the one of the pieces is the loss of deposits, and it's, as you can see, it's almost like weak, like it's delayed because it takes time apparently for Federal Reserve to gather this data. But as you can see, the situation is more or less sort of chronically stable, right? It's not improving, it's not getting worse, just kind of like in this, chronic inflammation that doesn't go terribly bad so far. And the same story is with the other 2 pieces of information. One is this bank borrowing, the bank term funding program, which is this, the orange one. So basically the whole integrative number is, as you can see, slowly declining, but essentially, as I said, is just stable inflammation without real sign of improvement and without really sign of worsening. So it just kind of remains there. And then interest rate is kind of remains also fairly elevated, which also sort of supports the case that there is no real improvement. It just stays inflamed. So this is kind of like a quick look at where the world is standing, meaning not just this, but the whole what I said about PMI from Europe coming before I discussed export-import data from Asia. Everything looks pretty grim, let's put it this way. Doesn't mean the world is ending tomorrow, though. I'm not trying to sort of scare anyone. It actually, all it really means is, you need to figure out how to get through this, and that's all it is. Because the idea is, if you warned, then you can be prepared, and that's the whole point of it. Not to sort of sell scare or anything like that. So actually, now let's switch. Well, I guess I'll stay here on this slide. Now let's talk about this Wagner Group attempt. It's actually not even clear what kind of attempt it was. So the declared attempt was that they are March for Justice, which is sounds very ridiculous, but that's what they called it. So what I would like, there's, after, analyzing the situation, what sort of was the pretext of what was the pressures that forced this move by the head of Wagner Group and in general Wagner Group is apparently we haven't seen that, but there was a pressure from Russian Minister of Defense, and then it was coupled by the pressure from Russian President Wagner Group to become part of the Russian, Ministry of Defense, of the regular Russian army, and sign a contract and all of that, and basically and just be turned into incapable unit that's typical for the Russian army, and the hope was for Wagner Group that this Ukrainian offensive will be somewhat successful, and it will lead to some kind of collapse on the front line, and then they can use that as excuse to say, well, you see, you're trying to force us to join this incapable organization, and then they will come as a savior to the front line whenever there is a hole, and plug it and sort of stabilize situation, and that's a reason for them to exist as a separate organization, which is a very good plan. The sort of unlucky part for it was that Ukrainian side failed at offensive, and so that put Wagner Group in very difficult situation, because deadline apparently that was put for Wagner Group was July 1st, and so they did not have choice at that. The deadline is coming up, right? So they have no choice. There is no sign that Ukraine offensive ever going to be successful. So then they staged this shelling of the Wagner Group location or camp or whatever it is, to kind of find this casus belli, and they started this march towards Moscow. And so that's looks like what sort of happened there. It has very strong popular support, and looked like if they didn't stop, they could have done, they could have achieved Moscow and Kremlin. But as you can see, there was some agreement reached. Still unclear the terms. Some people say that Prigozhin, head of Wagner Group, will move to Belarus into exile there, and basically the Wagner Group is going to be disbanded, which is going to be the best case scenario for Ukraine, because Russia will lose the most dangerous unit it has, and then there's a little bit more fair chance of Ukraine being able to achieve some, at least limited success, with the help of more Western equipment. Because, as I said before, there is no ability for self-reform in Ukrainian military or political top. So they will never reform to improve the organizational part. So the only way is sort of expansive, using the Western equipment and more of it. And so if that's the case, and we'll find out in the coming days, then in some way incompetent Ukrainian political top and military top is kind of safe for some time. If that's not the case, if the Wagner Group remains the way it is, we'll find out. We'll see what happens. It's, again, we'll find out in the coming days where it's gonna go. There are also rumors to the sort of on the opposite side that Russian Russian Minister of Defense and head of General Staff are going to get dismissed and going to be replaced by other people. So again, what's really going to come out of this whole thing remains to be seen. Then it's going to be possible to make any kind of comments. But taking aside this sort of fight for like more sort of personal fight for personal survival as an organization and on the personal level, this is another clear marker that Russia is moving towards its 1917 moment, and then Ukraine moving as well. That both countries are moving. They just have their own sort of, I'd say, passes, but the end destination is the same. So I would compare what happened to the Kornilov mutiny in August of 1917 in the Russian Empire. Sort of very similar situation where Kornilov was entrusted pretty much all of the military power, and then things started to go bad, and then he decided to do this mutiny as a way to save the country. The same kind of, history never repeats, as I say, but it rhymes, and this is very, very similar. The key point here is the internal problem of statism in Russia, corruption and all of that is not resolved. And this war is sort of putting pressure in terms of like forcing resolution to this problem for Russia. And the same for Ukraine. So eventually it's going to get resolved. It's just a question of time. As long as this war continues, it's going in that direction. And then now the reason I put this picture where you can actually see head of Ukrainian president I would say office or whatever it's called. I don't know. I don't even know how to call it, but basically it's his right, left hand, and the shadow of Ukrainian president, and probably sort of real president who runs Ukraine, Yermak, Andrei Yermak, and then he put the pictures of all of the Ukrainian generals next to him, and what this tells is Ukrainian political top is extremely scared that something similar to Wagner march or to Wagner attempt to take power will happen in Ukraine. And so this is pictured to show, okay, we have there is no potential mutiny. We all together in it. There is a strong support from military for this political top. That's a whole, and this really shows that Ukrainian political top is more scared of internal, mutiny or revolution or whatever you call it, than really external enemy, and that's really the biggest concern. And this really also means that they realize that they are unfit and incompetent, and there is this, that creates this threat to themselves. They're creating basically a threat to themselves from that perspective. So you can see that both political tops in Ukraine and Russia, they basically almost two sides of the same coin in a way. I would say it's unclear where sort of one changes into another one, basically, because it's all very interconnected system there. And then I also wanna now let's switch a little bit to general situation. Want to mention about China and Russia. So you probably have seen the news that China is supplying gunpowder, smokeless gunpowder to Russia. This is just one example. This case, it was for manufacturing of um, the cartridges or for small firearms. And this is only just tells that China is sort of engaged in this war and in the covert ways, which I think for the viewers is not surprise, and that's why all of this, attempt to be a peacemaker or whatever peace intermediary is absolutely disingenuous on part of China and fake. I mean, it was very clear, but it's just there is now proof that it's all sort of fake, and we all know that this is one alliance, and there's no surprises there. However, I think what Russia hopes, and it really reminds, Nazi Germany, April 1945, where there was a hope that there would be a fight, there would be sort of, let's say, war between the Soviet Union and U.S., U.K., and France on the other side, and it sort of saves the regime in Germany. So the same way is in Russia. There's a big hope that somehow there will be spark between China and the U.S., and U.S. will be forced to switch to the Pacific 100%, and kind of abandon Ukraine, leave it behind, and then Russia will be able to sort of finish its job. That's, I would say, very interesting sort of, I would say, hope, which to me is a sign of absolute desperation in the Russian political top, because things are not going for Russia well either. So this is, I just want to highlight that it's not, there's no sort of winning side, right? Both sides are losing, and losing tremendously. Obviously, Ukraine is losing, much more, smaller country, and it's strategically it's unclear how it's going to win this war, because this is war of attrition. And with the incompetence, as I said many times before, of Ukrainian both political and military leadership, inability to self-reform, Ukraine is too inefficient to win attrition war with Russia, and that's the biggest challenge and problem for Ukraine. So now let's just do a quick walk through the front line. I'm gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, starting from the situation along the state border. Relatively quiet, relatively low intensity, nothing major at this point is going on. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are also the same. Some tactical Russian attacks that are typical in this area, direction towards Kupiansk, but this is nothing major, not like how it's described as some major Russian offensive, absolutely far from truth. Then let's jump to the North Donbass front line. Things here are fairly quiet, again some tactical attacks, low level from Russian side, actually small success from Ukrainian side. I haven't shown it, but the Russian side was still having little bridgehead on the western side of this channel that goes here, that supplies water to Donbass. So that small bridgehead was 100% completely cleared. So there are no Russian troops on the western side of this channel. So there was some small success by Ukrainian side, but again, this is nothing really major. Just depriving Russian side of the sort of strategic opportunities for the future, which they not in that position to even to consider that. So, but it's still plus for Ukrainian side. Then let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here are pretty much like a broken record from the Russian side. It's all of this typical areas, the Avdiivka salient, Piski salient, and Marinka. Pretty much more or less the same story, without, again, any success so far. Now let's move to Zaporizhya, and actually kind of like this, well, call it, I don't know, Kherson front line, I guess we can call it this way. So fairly quiet, some low intensity attacks from Ukraine side, from south of Orikhiv, going straight north with the goal, this village Robotine, without, again, any major success. So again, so far it's all stalled without even sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. What is sort of more interesting development is actually along the Dnipro River. So and I mentioned this before, that Ukrainian troops had this tiny bridgeheads on the eastern side of the Dnipro River. So apparently, then Ukrainian side is expanding one of the bridgeheads somewhere near Ola Pristin, and even managed to put together this pontoon bridge and bring some heavier equipment, few units. So we'll see what happens out of this, because let me just go to the big map, as I showed before. So this is situation here is, Ukrainian troops stuck. There is opportunity obviously here, and this goes in line with the attacks towards the bridges that I showed before, and apparently there's desire to basically find solution by creating bridgehead, and then doing breakthrough from that bridgehead into the Russian rear and into Crimea. So we'll see if that will materialize in a meaningful way. Remains to be seen. This situation here probably allows to avoid these minefields, but at the same time, I think it's not going to take too much time for the Russian side to lay extensive minefields here as well, since they clearly seeing that Ukrainian command is making attempt from this side now, since they stuck here in Zaporizhya front line. That's it for the day. Thanks for watching. Until next time.